Okay, it is 6:30, so we will get started this evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is a Find Your Fit webinar through the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. I'm Mary Pat O'Neill. I'm an independent college counselor, and I volunteer my services with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. And tonight I am joined by Peg Keough of College Aid Pro. We are going to be talking about the cost of college, and the title for tonight is called Making Dollars and Cents Out of the Cost of College. This presentation is being recorded. This is what we call a conversation. Oh, why I always have such issues with my thing always freezes on me. I don't know why. Anyways, the format for tonight this is what we call a conversation. It is a structured conversation. Peg and I have worked a lot on this to have it all organized, but it's not a super formal presentation. We do not share our PowerPoint presentation. There will be resources, a resource list that gets sent out afterwards when you receive the recording, because everybody who signed up will get the recording. Peg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name's Peg Keough, as Mary Pat said, and I have been doing this kind of work on the financial side. I have a background in the financial industry, so I was a financial advisor and a financial planner, and just like all of you, I've been through this with my kids. I have twins, but they're gone, they're done. But when they hit high school, I started really digging into how financial aid and all that stuff works, not saving for college, but how it all works. And I was just blown away at how complicated it was. And so at that point, 10 years ago, I decided to kind of tweak my career and just focus on this. So that's what I did. Started my own business, and then I joined College Aid Pro. They acquired me a couple years ago, and this is the kind of stuff I do. It's just educating all of you so that you can go through this process with less stress, create expectations for your kids. You know, Mary Pat is the admissions and personal fit guru, and I'm kind of the financial fit person. So we kind of, it's the perfect trifecta, because you really need to look at all of them. It's very important. So
Exactly. And and while, as Peg said, I handle more on the college admissions side. I'm not a financial planning college counselor. That's a very specialized area. And that's why I'm so grateful that Peg is joining me tonight so that we can complement each other here. And like Peg, I have two children who are adults now and we've gone through the process, and I know how painful the pain for college can be. So all right. So as Peg said, there's three different types of fit to keep in mind when you're thinking about colleges. And there's the academic fit, there's the personal fit, and what we're going to talk about tonight is the financial fit. And I've been doing this for 10 years also, and I'm always surprised at the lack of talk. I guess it's the non-sexy part of the college process. It's not as exciting and things like that. But it is a very important part. You're going to see when I start showing you some numbers as to the cost of college, why it's important. And just like I don't think any of us would go house shopping unless we had a budget in mind, we were approved for a mortgage or knew how much we could afford to spend. I don't think people should be looking at colleges without having some idea of the affordability and talking about those numbers with our children. And if any of you have attended any of the Find Your Fit sessions that I've done on College 101 and things like that, I'm constantly saying it depends on the college. And a lot of this tonight also depends on the college, but it also depends on the family. And I want everybody to understand that this is not a one size fits all process. If your kids say, well, everybody else's parents, no, they're not, and every family has to figure out what is right for them. And there can be a big gap between a family's ability to pay versus their willingness to pay. And these are all really important pieces of the puzzle that need to be considered. And tonight we're talking about US colleges. And unfortunately in the US, the system was designed that parents are expected to pay for college. That doesn't mean that your kids can say, hey, mom and dad, you have to pay. But in other countries, the government can subsidize the cost of college, and the government doesn't do that here. So, all right. So first, I'm going to start off just explaining the three different types of college. And in other sessions, I talk a little bit more about how the three different types impact admissibility. But today, I just really want to talk about three different types of college and the cost, the impact on the cost of college. So the first one is the in-state public university, and we're in Washington State, so we have 6 four-year public universities: University of Washington, Washington State, Western Washington, Eastern Washington, Central Washington, and Evergreen State College. And because we are residents in the state of Washington and we pay property taxes are used to fund education. So because of all the taxes that we pay, they deeply discount the tuition at our 6 schools. So UW and Washington State, I think, is about in the $12,000 a year range, which isn't cheap by any means, but it is a lot less expensive to some of the other numbers I'll be talking about. And then Western, Eastern, Central, and Evergreen are lower than that. And that's why so many families really want their kids to stay in state, because it's a huge cost savings. Then there is the out-of-state public, and this is trickier for me to talk about because I'm talking about 49 other states. But first of all, you're not a resident in those 49 states, so you lose you lose the tax benefit. You haven't paid property taxes. So out-of-state tuition, an easy rule of thumb, is typically 3 times in-state tuition. Again, I'm speaking very broadly here, but it can be as low as, I don't know, $17,000, $18,000 a year to as high as $45,000, $46,000. It depends on the college. So there's a huge difference with the out-of-state publics compared to in-state. And then the final category is the private schools. And sometimes families will say, well, we can't afford them. They're not funded through taxes, so their tuition prices tend to be closer to that of out of state, but they can be very generous with scholarship money sometimes. So those are the 3 categories. Anything you want to say there, Peg, before I go on?
Well, I'll be hitting it in a few minutes, but you don't want to look at these crazy sticker prices. That's what I'll get into that more
Right.
later. It's kind of counterintuitive, but there are these raising prices, as we know, over decades. But it's that third column of Mary Pat's, the private. Sometimes those will be not the same as UW, but a lot
Yeah,
closer
pretty
than you
closer,
think.
right?
Yeah.
So here's a slide that I like to show. And actually, I meant to update this because I like to take that total number and times it by 4, although you do that later on in one of your slides, because it's not 1 year of college. Hopefully your children get out in 4 years. And you can see the high expense. As Peg was saying, so Gonzaga University, which is a private school, you can see the total is about $63,000 with full price tuition and room and board. But Gonzaga is very generous with their scholarship money. I had students with 3.8s getting into their computer science or engineering programs and getting $30,000 a year, so $120,000 off. So that does make it a lot more reasonably priced compared to some of the other ones. And Colorado State, I'm showing the WUI price there, which I'll talk about WUI in just a second. So what WUI is, you might hear this word talked about. It stands for the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And there's 14 states. Washington is one of them. And instead of that 3 times in-state tuition, the tuition charged for non-residents is 1.5, so 1.5 times. So it's a huge cost savings. Unfortunately, it is not all the public universities in those 14 states. If you go to the website there, if you just type in WUI on your search engine, you'll get to the website. But some of the more well-known schools that are WUI schools, Oregon State, Montana State, University of Idaho, University of Utah, University of Nevada. There's a number of them, Colorado State, and it can depending on the school, they can have certain qualifications. A student must have a certain GPA, or there could be certain majors that aren't included, but the website is pretty thorough. So, but as I said, it's 1.5 times in-state tuition.
And depending on the school, it can be really competitive,
Yes,
or
Oregon
some
State,
schools will just say,
yeah,
everybody who has a 3.2 who's a
mhm,
resident of one of the WUI states,
yeah,
da, 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 gets
yep,
it, and up to,
yeah,
it's really difficult to get
yeah.
WUI, so, and
Colorado
everything in
State,
between.
University of Hawaii are pretty welcoming to students. Oregon State, they just joined a couple years ago during the pandemic, and theirs is very competitive. Boise State is very competitive, which I don't know why I'm always surprised by that, but it is. Anyways, all right, Peg, you want to talk about financial aid?
Yeah. So I kind of hinted to this before. I mean, a key takeaway here is, the cost of attendance has been going up for decades, but all the colleges are discounting. They're all on sale. It's just a matter of how they do it. And it doesn't mean they're going to be on sale for that's why Mary Pat was talking about at the beginning. This is a lovely, family and friends are lovely. But you don't want to listen to them when it comes to this, because people will say, well, you're mowing the lawn, oh, don't do the FAFSA. I didn't do it. You won't get anything. And unless you're going to really sit down with these people that give you advice and say, so what's your income and what are your assets? And, I'm being facetious, right? You're not going to do that. It really depends, like Mary Pat said, from family to family. So anyways, I went off on a little tangent there. So all the colleges are discounting, and they're doing it in three possible ways. One family could get all three of these, and some schools don't do some of these buckets, but they are giving out endowment money to do this discounting. And the first two buckets, the need-based grants and the merit scholarships, that's where it's coming from, the college endowment. So it's a lot better to get some money from the college endowments, less coming out of your portfolio, your savings account, and drain some of those endowments. So the need-based grants, the first bucket, as the name hints, you have to have financial need. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. And that could also be from the federal government and from the state, right? Our state, the state of Washington, but most of it is the endowments. Then that second bucket, even if you're not eligible for need-based aid, merit scholarships, which Mary Pat was just talking about, Gonzaga, different schools have really nice merit, 5 figures guaranteed for 4 years. That's a lot of money. So Bill Gates's kids can get that. It doesn't matter what kind of money you make. So that's the second bucket. And then, of course, there's loans and there's work study. And those aren't bad, loans within reason, but it's not free, right? You either have to pay it back or your child has to work for it. So, but keep in mind, you don't want to, without digging and knowing the school better, you don't want to just look at a sticker price and say, oh, $70,000, we can't do that, because it could be 50,000 for your family. You just don't know till you learn what their financial aid policies are and where you fit as a family, basically.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about how colleges do determine eligibility for need-based, and also this is where I said how to appeal the offer if you don't like it.
Yeah. So we didn't ask, but a lot of times when I do webinars, I ask the parents to put in the chat, like, what graduating classes of high school are your kids? So if we have any class of 2024 parents, which I'm guessing we probably do, your kids are going to graduate next spring, next summer. Financial aid forms, you're submitting financial aid forms now. So if you don't submit a form, they don't know if you have any need-based eligibility. So there's two different financial aid forms that we'll touch on tonight, but when you submit them, they calculate something called a student aid index.
That's new.
Yeah, it's new. So if you've heard the term expected family contribution, we call it EFC. SAI, I'm not going to say it's the same as EFC, but it replaces EFC because some of the calculations in the background are different. Some major changes that we'll talk about in a few minutes, but you see the simple equation on the slide. They take their sticker price, the whole cost for a year, they subtract your SAI that comes off the FAFSA or the CSS profile, the two different financial aid forms, and they figure out your need. So if a school costs 80, and there's schools that cost over 90,000 now, and you have an SAI of 50, 80 minus 50, you have 30,000 of need. That doesn't mean the school's going to swoop in and say, here you go, Jones family, a lot of them will never do that, but that's your need, okay? On the flip side, they cost 80, but your SAI is 100,000. Well, you don't have any need. So that doesn't mean you remember the discount slide. There's other ways they discount, but that's how they're figuring out if you have any financial need.
Right. So, and you'll talk about how they get their student aid index in a minute here. So,
Yeah,
what are,
so there's two main parts to the SAI. There's income and there's assets. And it's student income and parent income, and then student assets and parent assets. Kids typically don't have a high income, so it's not as big a driver. The biggest driver in this is almost always parents' income. And if you make a nice living, that's a good thing. And in the long run of your life, it definitely is a good thing. But if you make a nice living, that's going to make your SAI higher. Okay. But let me touch on assets first. So assets, the key takeaway here is almost all assets are on the table, but not your retirement account. So 401k, 403b, IRAs, Roth IRAs, pension, those are all retirement accounts. So those balances are not part of the equation to calculate the SAI or the formula to calculate it. And assets are assessed the day you submit the form. So literally, if you want to pull up your portfolio that day, that is what it is. So if you need to buy a new car, if you need to get your kitchen counters redone, by all means, go do it before you're submitting the form, right? And spend money that you're going to spend anyways. A question that we always get is around 529. So if you've saved in a 529, like where does that fit? It is an asset that's considered. It's an asset of yours. And I'm talking to the parents. If the parent is the owner, which is the typical way it's set up with the student as a beneficiary, then that's an asset of the parent. And that's important. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make on the forms because they think, well, it's for my child. So of course it's theirs. That's logical, but it isn't. It's your asset. Now, if grandma has a 529 that she owns, that doesn't even go on the FAFSA because that person is not part of your household. It's not part of the FAFSA. So only the parent owned 529s are included, and only the 529 that you have for this child that's going to college. That's a new change. It used to be the whole balance of, if I talked to a mom the other day, she has 185,000 for triplets. I said, kudos to you for saving all that money. But it's great because she doesn't have to include the 185,000 times two for the other two triplets, only what she has for that student as a beneficiary. So just keep that in mind. If your child has a jointly held account with you, you can put it under as your asset. And parent assets are assessed at 5.64% up to that, whereas kids are 20 or 25%. So very big difference of how they would factor in and increase your SAI. So that's how assets work. Real estate, if you have any real estate besides your primary home, the equity in that real estate, meaning the market value minus your liabilities, that is considered an asset. The key thing is you don't want to overestimate the market value of your real estate. You don't want to lie, always want to be honest, but you want to find the lowest defensible value. Like you needed to sell yesterday, not staging it and waiting for the perfect offer. And it's very justifiable. As you can see on the slide here, there's something called an IRS quick sale value. You can take 15, 20% off that because, as we all know, you don't realize all that money when you sell your home. In the state of Washington, we literally pay sales tax, like on a candy bar, right? So you don't walk away with all that money. So the key thing is real estate is included. Your primary home that you live in, and I'll talk about this in a few minutes, that's not on the FAFSA, but there are other schools that do look at that.
hey, Peg, somebody asked, what if you own a business?
Yeah, if you own a business, this is a new change. So on the FAFSA, if you own a business, the value of that business is going to be asked about and needs to be disclosed. It used to be if it was a family-owned business with less than 100 full-time employees, that you didn't have to disclose it. On the CSS profile, you always did, but they got rid of the small business exclusion. But you want to remember, if you're a business owner, that some businesses, they don't have a resale value. When I had my own business before I joined College A Pro, Way to the Quad, if I got hit by a bus, I was the business. It wasn't like somebody was going to swoop in and buy me for $1 million, right? I didn't have inventory. I didn't have office space. And for consultants and sole proprietors like that, that's common, right? So if their value is zero, don't feel like you're lying and it's wrong. Now, If you're a financial advisor and you can sell your book of business 2.5 times revenue, then there is a value. So it just depends on the business. But yes, you will need to disclose that. And the income from your business is on your tax return. So that's always been included.
Okay.
So good question.
Yep. I froze up again here. Bear with me. Okay.
Okay, so
yeah.
income, which I kind of got into a little bit, is the other side of the SAI. So income, just like assets are real time, income is a 2-year look back, and that's called prior year, and you'll see PPY written all over the place. So you can see on the side, if you have a senior, if you're already in the CSS profile, you've noticed they're asking all about 2022. When the FAFSA comes out, it'll be all about 2022. And then juniors 23 and so forth. So it's a done deal, right? You can't go back and change things. But if we have any sophomore parents on here, now you know this, because the year that's going to matter starts the middle of sophomore year in high school. So that's hugely valuable to understand. So you don't create capital gains. Don't take distributions out of your 401k that you don't need to. Just don't elevate your income. Don't increase it if you don't have to. And it's mostly based on adjusted gross income. For students, you can see on the slide here in the federal level, the FAFSA, this coming year, they can make up to $9,400 and it's a wash. So for most kids, they're not making that much money. And so it doesn't move the needle at all if they made $5,000 in a summer job and working throughout the school year. So they have a nice allowance for students.
So Peg, what if somebody, okay, let's say it's class of 24, they're looking at the 2022 returns, but something negative has happened in the family. Maybe a spouse died or lost their job, something happened, medical. Can that be shared with?
Yeah, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to submit it the way you're supposed to with 2022, but then you absolutely need to reach out and appeal and let them know. And they will do
When you say they, do you mean the colleges?
Yeah, to the
Okay.
financial aid office, right?
Okay.
And they will do what's called exercise professional judgment, and they will actually go in and adjust to account for your situation. And what's really good is if people get divorced. Honestly,
Right.
people are married in 2022 and now they're like, Peg, we're separated, we're divorcing. If you go to appeal 2024, February, whatever, if your 2023 tax return is done, that's ideal. Because if 2023 was bad and you can just submit that, that's perfect to show. Forget about 2022. Sometimes it's a huge bonus year that you've never gotten. It could be a whole bunch of things. So the thing to realize is if your current situation is worse than prior year, that's when you want to reach out to the colleges, and they will listen, because what they care about is your ability to pay now. And so they will take that into account. Different schools will come to the table with, I always tell people cast a wide net, because it's always interesting to me how some schools will just go over the top on appeal and really work with the family, and then some in this middle, and some aren't as accommodating. So you just have to see. But yeah, that's definitely one of the reasons to definitely appeal.
Okay. I think this is when we said we would talk about this. The difference between need aware colleges and need blind colleges.
Yeah, so need blind, as the name kind of hints, they don't look at your ability to pay at all for admitting students. Need aware schools, it doesn't mean that every kid that applies, they look at them, can they pay full price? They're in. Like, that's not what colleges do. What I've been told by administrators behind the scenes is when they're rounding out their class toward the end, they've got 2 kids and one kid's finances with the parents, like they can literally almost write a full check. And the other child's going to need a lot of need-based grants, for example. And the kids are both admissible. They're very similar. The student that has the better resources might get in. That's what need aware means. But it's by no means the whole class, because they know they're going to be giving need-based aid and Pell Grants to a certain percent of kids and a lot of their endowment money. And they're ready for that. So don't think if you're eligible for need-based aid, that means you have no chance of getting into need-aware colleges, because that's just not the case.
Are there any general rule of thumbs for income levels where people can expect possibly to qualify for need-based aid?
It really, to use your phrase, it really
It
depends, right?
depends, I know.
Because if you're looking at a UW that all in is $30,000 with housing and the whole bit versus, a $92,000 BC, well, you could have a decent amount of need at BC, 30,000 of need with an SAI of 60,000, but in-state, you're not getting anything, right?
Right.
Or Cal Poly or something, you're
Right.
not getting anything. So that's why it's so important for families to have some decent estimates of their SAIs, because that's not the whole thing, but that's kind of where the planning starts. You have to know what your SAI is, or otherwise you're kind of, what I say, drifting through this process, and it really does make it more stressful, and then you can end up really being in some bad financial decision making situations and some tough conversations with your kids
Yeah.
if you
So,
realize down the road that you just can't afford stuff.
right. And I hear that a lot. So obviously parents from the class of 24, they're going to be filling out the FAFSA and getting their SAI that way, correct?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
if you're a younger parent, do you just fill out the FAFSA then to get an idea? Like how would a younger parent, not a class of 24, how would they have a sense of their SAI if they is there a way to do it without filling out the FAFSA?
Yeah, and actually you don't want to wait. The FAFSA will tell you what it is, but you don't want to wait till then. You want to figure this out sophomore, junior year, so you start planning with that financial fit in mind. So you don't want to wait for the federal government to tell you what it is, because now you've already picked all your schools and it's probably too late. There are the colleges all have something called a net price calculator, and this wasn't even on our topic, but it's not a bad thing to talk about. The government mandated this back in 2010, I believe. And some of the calculators are wonderful and they have many, many questions, but I will say a lot of them are just not accurate. And I'll show you in a little bit, but College Aid Pro, we actually have a tool where you can get your SAIs, and we actually have a free version of it where you will see both an institutional and a federal, and it's just really important to get that. You can go to the net price calculators, and that's not going to tell you your SAI necessarily, just gives you an idea of what you might get in need-based aid and sometimes merit. But there's just a lot of issues with them. We've done some webinars and done some statistics.
Well, I was going to ask if they've even updated their net price
I doubt it. I doubt it. And a lot of them, you go in and they have the 2022 cost of attendance in there.
Yeah.
Like it's blatantly obvious that they're not updating them. I don't know that they really wanted to be as transparent as the government wanted them to. And there's no SEC that's overlooking them and saying, hey, college, you need to have this updated. It's not accurate. So you just want to be really careful. There are some great ones, but a lot of them aren't that accurate. So yeah, you don't want to wait. If you have younger kids, this is a great time to learn about this and just start learning about your financial fit. So when you're building the list, you're taking that into account.
Perfect. Okay. So
yeah. So
if a family doesn't qualify for need-based,
right. So you have the 100,000 SAI. I mean, 50%, over 50% of the people I've worked with through the years, they don't have need-based eligibility, but they're not willing and or able to pay 70, 80, over 90,000 now a year times 4 plus inflation.
And then plus other kids, right? Or whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. So that's where merit scholarships can come in. So it's really important for families to understand there's certain schools that do not give merit scholarships. So the Ivy League schools, Stanford, MIT, the NESCACs, that's like
University of California.
Williams. What?
The University of California to out-of-state students.
Yeah, the UC school. So it's not just all privates, but there's no kid walking around on the Princeton campus, they might be getting some need-based aid, but none of them are getting merit scholarships. Princeton just doesn't give them. So if you have a child that has perfect SATs and 4.0 unweighted, 5.0, all crazy, crazy, great credentials, that's great, but don't expect a reward for that from these schools. And if your SAI is high, then you've got to talk about that with your child. And you got to think about how that's going to work. So that's a key thing that I think I've had people through the years that, oh, my child got in here and here. Where's the money? Well, there is no money at those schools for your family. So that's something to keep in mind. But many, many, many schools, and Mary Pat knows these as well as I do, offer super nice merit. She just mentioned Gonzaga. There's a lot of schools. There's even out-of-state state schools, not all of them.
Arizona State, University of Arizona.
Alabama,
Alabama,
they
yeah.
are looking for smart out-of-state kids, and they will throw money at out-of-state
That's how
kids.
they attract them.
Yeah, yep. And they, it used to be before all the test optional, it was a grade and ACT, boom, you get this. Like, it's on their website. There's no debating. And for planning, you can totally see. Plus, if your child got a 31 and at 32, they could give 5,000
Right.
more, that's $20,000 in your pocket. So just keep in mind that this is a real thing. Also, back to the appealing thing, and there's just a bullet here on my slide, is colleges that are competing that offer merit, that you can absolutely play them off each other during the appeal season. There's a right way to do it. And we do webinars on this, but you were really generous. You gave us 15,000 a year, but XYZ school gave us 20. If you can give us 18, that makes it affordable. I can't wait to be a Bronco or whatever in the fall, right? And the colleges will put in their algorithms and they'll decide if they're willing to do it. So merit, if that's the card you can play for discounts, you want to understand what schools offer merit and what type of merit awards.
And just to clarify for parents who might be new to all this, merit is based on grades and sometimes test scores too. So it depends.
Yeah, and then some schools it could be talent, there's music, but the main ones are grades and test scores. And with the whole test optional, a lot of schools said, oh, that's okay, we're still going to give merit. And they base it on GPA, and they might have an essay or something else that they require to get.
I've had students who didn't submit test scores receive merit, but then they hear from the college going, well, but if you do have test scores, we might give you more money too.
Yeah,
so you never know. Again, it depends on the school. And don't be afraid to ask them.
Yeah, don't. And a school, that's the thing about appealing. A school will, knock on wood, I've never seen it, I'm sure I never will. They don't rescind admission because you ask for more money. They just say no.
Yeah, or
thank you for trying, but no. Yeah. Or they might say yes, but they're never going to say, how dare you, we're pulling admission. They're just not going to do that, right? They're ready for people to reach out.
Exactly. Or even sometimes I think families are afraid to just ask the questions. Is there merit? How much could we possibly get? Those are very wise and smart questions to ask a college, and don't be afraid to ask the question. That's
and
if you're not admit you because you asked for merit aid.
Yeah, I mean, ask the questions, and if you're calling, you don't have to give your name, so they don't know who you are anyway.
They're not tracking anyways. They're not tracking. So, do you want to say anything about the value schools there, Peg?
Well, that's another way to go, right? Schools that have a cheaper cost of attendance. So I know $40,000 is a lot of money, and that's actually my daughter's alma mater, James Madison. When she went, it was about 35 all in, but it sounds crazy, but that's a bargain for out of state, right? Yeah. And so that's another way to go. And some of these state publics have amazing honors programs. Yeah. And then you get in a certain dorm and you get to register earlier, and there might be special scholarships. Mm-hmm. So there's just different ways to go about this than, just sitting down and saying, oh, we have no choice. And Mary Pat and I were talking about before, but the phrase, we'll just make it work, it's getting to be a more and more expensive phrase. And you just really want to be careful, because the colleges really don't care if and when you retire. That's not their thing, right? They want to wow you with the 1-year package, and you go on the tours and the beautiful dorms and the climbing walls and all that fun stuff. But that's where, you get to sit down and think about what can we afford? And then let's communicate with our child around this so you don't have to have awkward conversations second semester, senior year when award letters are coming
Yeah.
in
And
and the
those
numbers are high.
conversations are heartbreaking. I've witnessed them, and you know, everybody's situation is different, and that's just the way life works, and we work. Yeah. So, all
Yeah,
right.
and it doesn't have to be that way. I'll share my screen and I'll just show you because I did this with my kids. What I'm telling you all to do, and that's what I had with my
Yeah.
son. Senior year, 2 schools. One was 70,000 more. I knew it wasn't a good fit for him, but I didn't say any of that because I'm his mom. But I said, look, we talked about this. You know where we're at, and you like both schools, and this one just isn't. And he said, okay. And he went to the other school. Like I didn't have what Mary Pat's referring to, these really hard conversations where kids are heartbroken and the parents feel awful, and it's just not fun, and it truly is avoidable. It truly is. You just have to understand this stuff and then talk to your kids about it. So let me just show you a case study here, just to kind of, I think it's powerful when you actually see in a family what I'm talking about. So if you look up here, you'll see the two SAIs, the two student aid indexes. This is the one that comes off of the FAFSA, the federal one. This is the one that comes off the CSS profile. And we'll talk about these if these terms are new to you in a minute. But as I said at the beginning, the sticker price a lot of times is irrelevant, and you want to realize that. You look at these high sticker prices of my 4 schools here, you notice at 2 of them, there's some sizable discounts. Now, I want to make a point here. You see there's a range up here because I'm thinking somebody will probably put this in the Q&A. So Peg, why is there a range? Well, there's a range there because the schools that require the CSS profile, they look at your primary home equity, the home you live in. And that's what I mentioned earlier, but they all do it differently. Some schools don't look at it at all the way up to schools looking at every penny of your equity and throwing it into the equation. And so you can see Northwestern and Stanford both fall in the institutional SAI bucket, but dramatically different. This family's paying full price at Northwestern, we're projecting, but a nice discount from Stanford. And it is exactly because Stanford doesn't look at home equity. And this family has sizable home equity, and Northwestern does. So just knowing that, it's just you wouldn't know that if you didn't even know to look. So these are all these nuances that if you understand them, it can be really huge. The other thing I want to point out is Berkeley over here. UC schools are super popular with Washington
Oh, yeah.
kids. And they use the federal methodology. So you're thinking, all right, Peg, well, you showed us the equation. There's a lot of need there, over 20,000. Why is this family paying full price? Well, that's because Berkeley is never going to give an out-of-state family money, even though there's 20,000 of need. They'll give you the subsidized loans and work study from the federal government. They're not going to give you any grants. And so that you got to understand that it's not just number crunching. Oh, there's this much need and Berkeley will give, they won't. Not to an out-of-state kid. California kid, that's a different story, right? So this stuff is very important to understand. And then the other piece is the 4-year view, because as we all know, this is a 4-year expense unless you have a child
Hopefully only
running
4 years.
yeah, and that's funny. That's almost exactly what I always say, Mary Pat. Because my daughters at JMU, they call them super seniors. And I was like, oh, that's painful, man. These are these parents paying for a 5th year of college, right? Because they couldn't, for whatever reason, they couldn't get out in the 4 years. But you want to look at this, get a good net cost for 1 year, multiply it by 4, add inflation, and then bring in that we're talking about it again, the budget. What can you afford over 4 years? And then look at those funding gaps. Like at Stanford, you're great, right? You're basically, there's not a lot of loans there. Whereas here, you're looking at loans, and we look at it 10-year, 25-year, and it might not be loans, but then it might be leveraging your equity in your home, 401k, whatever it is. This isn't to scare you. It's just to build a list with affordability in mind. And if you have one that's not that affordable, you can start talking to your child about private scholarships and how are we going to make up the gap. And that it will save you a lot of heartache. I can say that as a parent. The
Yeah.
more you know and the more you
Understand,
dig in, the better.
Since we are parents, we know it's hard. A lot of parents don't like talking about money with their children. They don't like to crush their dreams. They, you know, and I'll hear sometimes where parents will say, well, let's just see and all this, but there's facts out there, and it's the UCs, as you said, UT Austin is never going to give money to an out-of-state student, like
Yeah.
it's just the reality of it. So
Yep,
so
yep. And it's nothing against UT. It's just
oh
better for you to know that. And
yeah,
then you can
yeah,
say, well, you're going to have to find some private scholarships and we'll put this much toward it.
right.
And you don't have to sit down and I never did. I never told my kids what we make. I never
Oh
shared
no,
any of that kind of stuff. I just said, this is how much we've got and this is how much from cash flow. And if it becomes more than that, we got to sit down and talk. And you don't have the means to pay it, to my kids. So, and you're also modeling good financial decision making, which is just hugely valuable for your kids. That's a good lesson for them to learn.
all right, well, let's talk about the fun forms people can fill out,
All
FAFSA and
right.
CSS
Okay.
profile.
So yeah, if you have a senior, you're already into the CSS profile. So the FAFSA typically goes live October 1. This year is an anomaly. So if you don't have any older kids, this is your new normal, right? Not that it goes live in December, which is what they're telling us. Normally goes live October 1, but because of the extensive changes, they've needed more time to get them in. We don't know when in December. It's not something to stress about. Everybody's in the same boat, okay? And I know parents that I talk to are getting all upset. And I said, just take a deep breath. When it goes live, it'll go live, and the colleges will figure it out. They know they need your FAFSA. They'll figure it out. What you can do now, though, is you can get what's called a Federal Student Aid ID, FSA ID, and the link's up there. You can Google it and you'll get to that link, but make sure you're on studentaid.gov because you're going to put in your date of birth and your social security number to get that ID. And you don't want to be doing that on a third-party copy site, then your identity is going to get stolen, right? So you
I'll
need
put
it.
that on the resource list that we
Oh,
sent
perfect,
afterwards.
perfect. You need to get it as a parent and your child needs to get it. And that's going to be the way that you go into the FAFSA. That's changed this year. You're not going to be able to get in with a social security number and date of birth. Your child's going to log in with theirs. They're going to invite you, and then you're going to log in to your FAFSA. You're part of the FAFSA and contribute. So you need those. So go ahead and get them now. It takes a few days for the government to come back and say, okay, you're approved. You are who you are. And you're going to need that every year because you're going to submit the FAFSA every year. Now, most schools in the country only require this form. So they give out their endowment money. The state of Washington uses it and the federal government uses it. We'll talk about the CSS in a few minutes. A key difference between the two is only if you're divorced, only the custodial parent submits the FAFSA. And the definition of the custodial parent has changed. This is one of the changes. It's the parent that provides the most financial support on a year look back from when you're submitting the form. So that could be the parent that's paying child support, but not necessarily. And I've had a lot of parents say to me, well, we're 50-50 Peg. So that's awesome. So what you can do is whichever parent is better to submit that FAFSA, lower income, lower assets, have that parent spend a little bit more money on soccer, whatever it happens to be. So you're being honest and you are providing slightly more support for your child on a year look back. And then that helps you get a lower SAI and more money from the colleges and maybe money from the state and the federal government. So you want to think strategically here. The government didn't say whoever has the highest AGI. They could have. That's the fallback. But to me, there never needs to be a fallback. If it's 50-50, then I recommend you do what I said. Also, you want to think about it. Like some parents, well, I get child support. So it's a bunch of child support. So of course my ex provides more. I'm like, well, is your child with you 90% of the time and you're paying a mortgage and utilities and divide all that by 3 because there's 3 of you in the household. That's part of your support. So it might make sense to get out a spreadsheet, open up your Excel and figure it out. You don't want to lie. You don't want to play with numbers and not tell the truth. But you might be pleasantly surprised, like, wow, when I factor all this stuff in, I am providing more. But some families, it's very cut and dried. And moms say, I'm spending $35,000 on my daughter's dance. So she went, right? I was shocked that she spent that much. But so she's providing more of the support. So that's fine. But if it's close, take the time to figure that out. It could mean a lot of money in your pocket or a lot of money from the colleges. So only one parent submits, and that's how it's defined. So that's the FAFSA. So I have alluded to this, and so did Mary Pat. So real quick, first of all, the FAFSA is going to be much shorter, a third of the question. So that's a positive. We already talked about the second one. Now it's going to be student aid index instead of expected family contribution. If you are eligible for Pell Grants, it's going to get even better. So this is my favorite change, because the people that need the most help are going to get more. The Pell Grant's going up, and it's based on poverty level as well as adjusted gross income. So it's going to be different ways to get it instead of just the one way in the past. So the takeaway there is it's a positive for low income families. If you are divorced or separated, I already talked about that. The definition of which parent submits the form has changed. So it's the parent that provides the most financial support. In the past, if grandma and grandpa were going to help in any way, that got added back in as student income, and it raised that SAI. They've gotten rid of that. So any outside help with college is given to the student is not going to be a question. That's a big help. Something that's not a big help that would have hit me pretty hard is if you have two kids in school at once. I had twins. It used to be that now the SAI would go down by almost 50%, which makes sense. You have two kids in school, same income, same assets. Well, the government got rid of that. So they said, nope, we're not reducing the SAI by about 50% when there's two in school. But I will say that on all the webinars that I sat on all summer that the government put out, they did make a point to say that the colleges can take that into account if they choose to, not for federal aid, but the state and the colleges can take that into account. And there will be a question on the FAFSA asking how many kids are in college. So the colleges will know. So this is another appeal item. You've applied to a bunch of schools, and it's obvious to you that some of these schools have taken into account that you have two kids, and some that haven't. And reach out to the ones that haven't and say, hey, could you please do this? I know you can. So that's another thing. The more information you know, the better you can talk to the colleges. 401k, 403b pre-tax contributions, which is how a lot of people save, comes right out of your paycheck, goes in the market, shows up on your W-2 box 12. Those aren't added back anymore. So that's nice, because that was huge. Could be $30,000 this year with the catch up. So, and then there's also other untaxed income that's not added back, like workman's comp and non-education veterans benefits and clergy housing allowance. So they took away a lot of that stuff that they were adding in. And that's nice for a lot of families. That helps the SAI. So
Okay.
those are the biggies.
CSS profile now.
Yeah, so this is the second form. This is live now. So if your child has schools that require the CSS along with the FAFSA, you got to get in there and do it, because there's deadlines coming up in November.
And a lot of, if any students are applying early decision, most of those schools typically require the CSS profile.
Yeah. And those deadlines could be November 1 for early decision. There's a deadline for the application. There's a corresponding financial aid form deadline. They're not necessarily the same, but they're, plays off of how your child is applying, ED, EA, or regular admission. So there's about 200 schools, mostly private, that require this form. That's that institutional SAI that you saw in my sample family. As I said, home equity, more often than not, is in there. It's some multiple of income. It might be all of it, right? Business owners, we had that question. The value of they're going to ask all about your business. Divorced and separated families, whoever is the custodial parent per the FAFSA definition will submit the CSS with your child. The non-custodial parent will submit a separate one. They both go to College Board, privacy is maintained. The college sees both of them. The CSS is much longer and much more complex than the FAFSA. So this year, If you're doing the CSS, when the FAFSA goes live, you're going to think that you died and went to heaven because it's going to be so much easier, right? It's short. It's even going to be shorter than it was last year. So you're getting the harder one done first. So that's probably a good thing. So that's the CSS profile. You're submitting it along with the FAFSA.
And then with international students, neither Peg or I are experts in international. But basically, if a student is, Peg, what was the phrase you used?
An eligible non-citizen. So if you Google that, it'll give you the bulleted definition. That means you can submit the FAFSA.
Right. And those are typically students who have green cards. For students who are here on other visas, you are considered an international student, and every college handles them differently as to whether or not they give merit aid or things like that. But as far as the in-state public universities, like getting in-state tuition at UW and all that, you do qualify for that. So, but it's only in the state of Washington. So, but talking to the colleges is the best source of information. If you are an international student, you cannot fill out the FAFSA. So, right. Anything else, Peg?
No, I mean, it's really a school by school basis for international, because some schools have nice merit awards for international students, but you really need to go school by school. Unfortunately, some private schools do that. So I've seen some schools give in-state tuition, like Mary Pat said, in other states too, but it's not an across the board sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm here through the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, and they survey, people in the district, and they told me, they said, well, everyone would like to have the cost of college reduced. And I kind of laughed and said, well, I am not a magician. I only have to work with what we have. But here are some suggestions that you can do that can help reduce the cost of college. So in our high schools, students can do Running Start, which is basically they can get up to 2 years of college paid for. They're taking classes at the community colleges. It's paid for through the state. Students can graduate with an associate's degree. So that certainly can reduce the cost of college. If students don't want to do Running Start, and let's say, maybe they're not sure what they want to study, or they don't have the grades to get into whatever school that they'd like to get into when they're done with high school, sometimes starting at a community or technical college can be a great way to start. Bellevue or like Washington Tech, a year's tuition is about $4,000, and there's need-based aid available for all that. As Peg said earlier, have a broad net, okay? Consider colleges that are generous with merit aid. There are colleges that would just love to have those super smart students, and that's how they attract them. And I know sometimes, sometimes I meet with parents and they're like, well, my student's a 4.0, and they've taken all these AP classes, they have perfect test scores and all that. But the reality is, in the US, about 1.5% of high school students get full rides. so because there's a lot of smart students. So just consider, I always say it's not where you go, it's what do you do where you go that will determine. And there's wonderful, fabulous colleges. And then once a student is in a college, after their freshman year, they could apply to be what's called an RA, which stands for resident advisor. And obviously it's a job, but they get room and board. And that can be $15,000-$20,000 a year just taken care of. So that's another way. Any other suggestions, Peg, that you have for reducing the cost of college?
Yeah, no, those are, I bring up community college, and if kids are already in Running Start, private scholarships, but that it's a little early to think about that. That's more, I think, of private scholarships as a gap filler.
Yeah.
Unless, like I said earlier, it's a school that just you know your child wants to go, you're not going to get any need-based aid and they don't give merit, then you can start looking for private
A
scholarships.
lot of the private scholarships aren't huge.
Yeah,
I mean, there are some big ones, but
they're
it's
very
really
competitive
it's
though.
very
Yeah.
selective, and your student has to have done something pretty outstanding on their own. So, but
Yeah. Finding private scholarships is definitely a little side job, and you find 500 here,
yeah,
1,500 here, and they're typically not for all 4 years. So
no,
you're
right,
doing that over the whole time you're in college.
right.
You got
And
to keep
I often suggest that parents do the legwork on that, because the poor kids are so worn out by applying to college that
another essay and
yeah,
more
yeah,
recommendations. Yeah,
right,
I
exactly.
hear you.
So you want to talk about the timeline for need or merit-based aid?
Timeline, like deadlines, is that what we're
Yeah, I
talking
mean,
about?
we kind of talked about it, like, and things are a little screwy this year because of the change in FAFSA. Just
Yeah, and especially, if you're applying early decision, the school, like Mary Pat said, more than likely requires the CSS profile, so that's already available. If you're applying early decision, there are a few schools that are FAFSA only. You just need to reach out to them and say, how are you handling this, right? How are you handling the assessing my needs,
right.
since the FAFSA
And
FAFSA isn't available. But deadlines are super important if you're eligible for need-based aid. I was helping a mom a little bit ago, who came to me. She's got a junior at Southern Cal, and said, my package totally changed. And I tapped this guy that used to run financial aid. And the first thing he said to me is, did she miss the deadline? Because if she did, that could be why it's so much lower. So if your kids aren't good about that, it's a good skill they're going to need, but you need to, that's where you don't want to step back and let them make
right,
mistakes. It's
right.
going to really hurt your pocketbook if you
Yeah.
don't make the priority deadlines.
Yeah, I always remind my senior parents, because I'm big about allowing the child to control the process, but it's like, no, not this time of year. You have to be involved, because they can miss things so easily and really screw things up. So,
Yep, yep, definitely.
a school's website, on their financial aid page, they'll say whether or not what they require, if it's CSS profile. You can also, on the College Board, there's a list of all the schools that require the CSS profile. Okay, you
Yeah.
want to talk about student loans, Peg?
Yeah, just real quick, there's different types of student loans. So there's federal, there's state, and then there's private. So on the federal level, if your child submits the FAFSA, which I recommend that every family submit the FAFSA, they're automatically eligible and they can be awarded federal direct student loans. And it's their debt. It's under their social security number. Anybody can pay it off at any time, but they don't have to start paying it off until 6 months after graduation. That's typically the best interest rates. And your child's starting to build a credit history, because it's the government encouraging education, because kids are on a good credit risk, right? They don't have collateral and they don't have income. Any other loans, you're going to be more likely than not, or somebody's co-signing, right? So then it's your debt as well. There's a parent, they call it a plus loan, but it used to be parent plus loan. It's actually your loan as a parent. I I'm not a fan of those, but it just really depends on your family. And then, like I said, there are some really good state programs, and there's some states that will let any family they'll loan to any family. You don't even have to, like Rhode Island, you don't have to go to school in Rhode Island, and you can still get a loan from them. So but those are the tiers, and then private. And for some people with great credit, private's the right place to go. But that's something you'll figure out once you get into schools and you appeal, then you can start looking at the loan options. But please, please, please submit that FAFSA for sure, because otherwise your child isn't eligible, and you're not eligible to do the parent loan if you decide that's something you even want to consider. So high
Right.
level, those are the different types of loans out there.
And again, a lot of times, teenagers do not really have a sense of money, and the number of times I've heard a student say, well, I'll just take $50,000 of student loans out each year for four. And
Yeah, they
you know,
can't. They can't. Yeah.
well, right, I know they can't, but they don't understand what could, like, I always say, type in the words, "I regret my student loan," and see the pages that come
Well,
up.
that's why we have that affordability tab in the software, because it shows like you're signing up for a $1,500 a month payment for 20 years when you do this, or 10 years, or 25 years, you know? So it kind of makes it more real.
Yeah, yeah. So, I think we've been giving advice for parents the whole time. I mean, the biggest thing is just being realistic, with and having an idea what a family's affordability is, not thinking that you're ruining your children if you tell them that, hey, like I always sometimes I'll, the students say, well, my parents say they can afford $25,000 or $30,000 a year. And I'm like, oh my God, you're so lucky. I mean, it's just because they are. I mean, what a blessing. So
Yes, yes.
this is real money. So any last minute advice that you have, Peg?
Yeah, kind of the same lines. Just, do your homework, understand your financial fit, and then that'll help you when you visit schools, the questions asked. They're very good at marketing these colleges, and they'll make statements that are accurate, but they might not be a complete statement. There's another sentence they should say after it. And parents will hear certain things and think, wow, that percent of kids are getting that. Well, that's going to be me. So that's affordable. And if you understand your family, you'll know, well, that's not us. So we're not going to get that money. So what does that mean for this school? And it's all about projecting net cost. There's no crystal ball to say exactly what a college will do, but you can get in the ballpark, and that'll just help you sleep at night as a parent and then set expectations for your kids. And if this is, if you have a senior, it's the last year until they go off to their next chapter. You don't want it to be yucky for when you can avoid it, right? You don't want the friction and we get enough of it because they're teenagers, right? But you can avoid some of it around paying for college. You really can, but you can't dig your head in the sand. And just being on this webinar shows that you are willing to learn. So kudos to everybody for taking the time.
That's right. Okay. All right. So this is your commercial.
Yeah, so what I would say, and a couple of people asked, in the Q&A, like, how can I know my SAI? Well, you saw in my sample family, that's our software that we created for families called MyCap. So the link here, and Mary Pat will put it when she sends the follow-up, you can set that up for free, and you can put up to 3 colleges, and everything you saw on that dashboard, you can do that for 3 colleges. You can click, you can see, do they require the FAFSA or the CSS profile? When you scroll down under school, we have all of their merit scholarships there. So even if we don't project one because it's competitive, you can look at the Dean Scholarship, click on it, see what grades and test scores are required. It'll help you start getting into it. Sure. Can you upgrade to put in unlimited schools? Yes, you can. Costs $149. And I have a coupon. She'll put it in, just full disclosure, I forgot to get the coupon created, and I realized 10 minutes before this webinar. So
it's
coupon,
LWSF 15 for Lake
yeah, and I'll
Washington
put it in
School
the
Foundation
chat. It's LWSF
SF.
15. Oh, I don't know if I can, it looks like the chat's disabled. So
Oh,
just
okay.
LWSF 15 for
But
Lake
it'll be in the
Washington
resource
School
sheet
Foundation, right?
yeah.
And that'll give you 15% off the 149. We also can meet with you for an hour. I do those hours. I don't have huge availability, but I do them. But I've built out a team of experts. You want somebody to look at your financial aid forms. You just want to understand, you set up your account. What does this mean for my family? That's $349. That gets you the full upgrade. So you don't do the 149 plus the 349. You just do the 349. And there's a discount off of that. So I strongly encourage you, if nothing else, set up your free account, look at your SAIs. We have a YouTube channel. We have office hours every other Monday. They're free. If you have any questions about that, like how do I find the office hours, just email support@collegeapro.com and say, hey, I was on this thing with Mary Pat and Peg. How do I register for office hours? My Anne-Marie, who runs our support, she'll send it to you. If you do College A Pro YouTube, you'll find all these past webinars, all these free resources. Our website is full of blogs and for information too, collegeapro.com. Just do do something. I know we're all busy, but just set up your free account and start looking at the free resources, get acquainted with it. And then maybe you'll need more support down the road. Maybe you won't. You're a DIYer, you're good to go, but just keep the ball rolling on this conversation.
All right. And then just a reminder, I am a resource here in the community. So if you ever have questions, just send them to me at findyourfit@lwsf.org. You can also reach me on the Facebook and Instagram and all that fun stuff. So now we're going to go to questions. Let's see if we have.
Yeah, and I think some of them were, there were a few that were similar. There
Okay,
were
so somebody said,
FSA IDs.
Okay, so my son is junior. He has about a 3.8. Is it recommended to take the PSAT for national merit? National merit does take into consideration a student's GPA. 3.8 might be low, but the first thing to do is to take the PSAT, which I think was a week ago. I don't know if they're offering it again in the school district, but it's a score. Last year, I think students who had a 221 or higher in the state of Washington were national merit finalists. Someone asked, when should a class of 25 parent create the FAFSA ID? That wouldn't be till next year, right?
Yeah, you don't have to. There were two of them. When should we start FSA? I'm assuming that question means FSA ID. There's no, if you have a senior, you want to go do it, get it done. If you have a junior, when they start their just summer, August before senior year, because the FAFSA should go live in October 1, 2024. If you have a junior, so you just do it a couple months ahead, so it's all done, and just store it securely somewhere.
So Peg, here's a question that I hear a lot. What if we know we won't qualify for any need-based aid, but are hoping for merit? Do we still need to fill out both forms?
I would say yes. There are some schools that require both forms, but then there's some that just require the FAFSA to be eligible for merit. And there is no uniform list out there. And IECs like Mary Pat or always rating it. Does anybody have a list? And people send stuff. Oh no, that one is in, add that one. The bottom line is no. So that's a huge reason to submit the FAFSA.
Yeah.
Also, there are schools that if you don't apply for financial aid for freshman year, they will never let you do it again. So
if something happens in the family a year later,
COVID, somebody passes away, like Santa Clara, I haven't talked to him this year, but in the past, they've been that type of school. And I've tried to get them to budge for families and they would not move. NYU is like that. So if you want to roll the dice and assume nothing's going to change in your life, I wouldn't roll those dice. Even before COVID, I used to tell families that. So we just recommend, very few circumstances do I say not submit the CSS, but across the board for most families, yes, and always for the FAFSA.
And from a personal perspective, my daughter, who graduated in high school in 2014, and she went to a small liberal arts college who I remember I wasn't a college counselor yet, and I called to say, do we need to fill out the FAFSA for merit aid? And they said no. And I said, okay, so I didn't fill it out. And then, although I did end up filling it out because for work study, she needed it. And it was a school and she wanted to work in college. But anyways, then the next year, so we got our merit aid. Then the next year, the tuition bill came and there was no merit shown. And I thought my husband was going to have a stroke because it was quite substantial difference. And I called and they said, oh, well, it's because you didn't fill out the FAFSA. And so anyway, so in our family, we would always fill out the FAFSA, just always. So, okay, what other questions do we have there? Can we fill out the FAFSA and CSS in junior year? No, you can't. You can't do that.
No, you got to wait till October of the
senior year. But you can find out what your SAI is junior year or sooner.
Yep, exactly.
Are there lists of colleges that are generous with merit aid? I mean, you can do a search. I don't really know how. I mean, like I know schools you know, around here that are generous. But I don't think that there's necessarily a list.
Yeah, I don't know of any, like, rule of thumb, private schools, but not all private schools. Like I said, the Ivies don't do it, the NASCACs don't do it. So it's not all private schools. So there really isn't, there really isn't a list that you can just go look up, you
Yeah.
know.
Um,
And it depends on the student too.
no.
You could find a list and then realize, well, my child's not going to get it at some of these schools. So
Someone was saying, isn't there a restriction on Tesla not having running start? Well, I mean, if a student wanted to do running start and was at Tesla, you would leave Tesla and go back to your home high school. They were wondering if AP honors classes would qualify for running start. A student might earn some college credits from taking AP tests, but that's very different from running start. Running start, basically a student takes their high school classes at the community college and they earn college credit. And if they go junior, senior year, they're getting 2 years of college credits. Now, in our area, these are widely accepted, but part of your research, I can't guarantee you that schools in Rhode Island or Georgia are going to accept your running start credits. So that's something that should be part of a research. What can a class of 26 do now to prepare, Peg?
you start digging in and understanding your SAIs, the two SAIs. And then if your child has some schools, start looking at those schools. How do they handle financial aid? I mean, you can just start looking into all that. Your child hasn't taken SATs, but if they start doing practice ones, you can get a feel for how they do on tests. But that's really what you can do.
Yeah, and again, you can always go onto a school's website and type in the words merit scholarships, see what comes up. If you're looking at out-of-state public universities, you need to type in non-resident merit aid. And again, there are some schools that are generous with merit aid that are out-of-state publics, and then there's others who say, nope, if we accept you, you get to pay $70,000 a year, and there's no money for you. So that's where doing your research. It said, what percentage of parent income is contributing to the SAI?
It's like the tax tables. So there's a chunk, and once you get up to not too much, 40 or 50,000, then it's after allowances, it's assessed at 47%. So it's crazy. Like you can spend 47% of your income on college, but that's why it's such a big driver, because the percentages are so high. So saving for retirement and those 401ks that won't get added back now, it's a good way to lower your income. So that's a nice little strategy for the FAFSA schools, because they don't count that anymore.
Someone said, are there any special or good ways to invest or save for colleges with all the recent changes?
As far as investments that aren't included, cash value life insurance up to this point has not been asked about on the forms. That can be, there are insurance guys out there, they'll be very happy to sell you big insurance policy and they get really nice commissions off it. I'm not saying that it's wrong, but you really want to look at that, understand the investment, make sure you don't need that money, understand the fees. There's a lot of, don't do it in a silo of just thinking about how that will affect your SAI. Make sure it makes sense for your overall planning. Talk to your accountant and really dig in. That's really the only place where you can quote unquote hide investments. And I have seen a few schools ask on the CSS, do you own cash value life insurance? But that's the main place across the board on both forms where they don't specifically ask about that.
Okay. Well, I think we got all the questions, and it's 7:45, which is when I said we would stop for you to respect your time. So thank you, everybody. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. We do not share our slides, but there will be a resource sheet on that has lots of the information, a lot of links to things, how to get the coupon discount with College Aid Pro and all that. So appreciate everybody coming tonight. I know it's not the happiest of topics to talk about, but it is an important one. And thank you so much, Peg. I really appreciate your
Oh,
time.
you're welcome. You're welcome. It's always fun for us to have our conversations.
That's right. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
All right, take care.
Bye.